Cuba next? The $1.2 trillion domino effect. 90 miles. That's the distance between Havana and Florida. In geopolitical terms, that distance is nothing. And yet, for decades, Cuba has existed in a strange strategic silence, isolated, sanctioned, economically constrained, but largely contained. That silence may be ending, because when global systems are stable, small nations remain small stories. But when the global system is under strain, pressure points matter. And right now, the global system is under strain. High sovereign debt, elevated interest rates, energy volatility, great power rivalry intensifying. In that environment, even a small destabilization near critical trade routes can ripple outward. So why are certain analysts quietly asking, is Cuba the next domino? This is not about Cuba's GDP. It is about geography. It is about influence. It is about leverage. And potentially, it is about $1.2 trillion in regional exposure that could be repriced if instability expands. Cuba today faces mounting internal pressures, chronic power shortages, fuel scarcity, currency weakness, rising informal market activity, increasing immigration. Tourism revenues remain inconsistent. Venezuelan oil support is no longer reliable. Remittances fluctuate under sanctions pressure. This combination creates fragility. Fragility does not automatically lead to collapse, but fragility invites external influence. And this is where the strategic landscape shifts. China's presence in Latin America has expanded steadily over the last decade. Port investments, telecommunications infrastructure, energy agreements, debt restructuring frameworks. Russia, though economically constrained, maintains symbolic and security ties. The United States remains geographically dominant, but politically reactive. Cuba sits in the center of this triangle. In stable times, this is manageable. In unstable times, it becomes combustible. Now consider global markets. Shipping through the Caribbean connects Atlantic trade lanes, U.S. Gulf energy exports, and Latin American commodity flows. Insurance pricing for shipping routes is sensitive to geopolitical risk. Energy markets are sensitive to regional instability. Emerging market bond spreads react quickly to perceived escalation. Even rumors can move capital. In 2024 and beyond, markets are more reactive than they were a decade ago. Algorithmic trading amplifies headlines. Social media accelerates narratives. Capital flight can begin before official confirmation. If unrest intensifies in Cuba, and if external powers are perceived to be competing for influence, investors will not wait for clarity. They will reprice risk. That repricing is where the $1.2 trillion estimate becomes relevant. Regional sovereign bonds, emerging market ETFs, energy-linked equities, shipping insurers, defense contractors, U.S. Gulf infrastructure exposure. When risk premiums expand simultaneously across interconnected sectors, the domino effect begins. Not overnight, but progressively. And progressive shifts are often underestimated. The last time a Caribbean flashpoint reshaped global strategy was 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis nearly triggered nuclear escalation. Today's dynamics are different, but geography has not changed, and proximity matters. The question is no longer, can Cuba survive economically? The question is, what happens if its instability becomes a stage for great power signaling? Because when signaling begins, markets react first, diplomacy reacts second, and populations react last. The early signals are already visible. Increased diplomatic traffic, telecom upgrades linked to foreign vendors, military cooperation discussions resurfacing quietly, energy agreements renegotiated. None of this confirms crisis, but combined it suggests motion, and motion in geopolitics rarely remains contained.
Let's explore how this could escalate. Scenario 1. Managed transition. Cuba implements gradual reforms. Foreign capital enters under supervision. Infrastructure stabilizes. Emigration slows. Markets breathe. Risk premiums normalize. The domino does not fall. Scenario 2. Strategic alignment shift. Facing economic stress, Cuba accelerates partnerships with non-Western powers. New port access agreements, expanded telecommunications footprint, security cooperation frameworks. The United States responds diplomatically. Sanctions debates intensify. Political rhetoric sharpens. Markets begin pricing uncertainty. Shipping insurance costs rise. Caribbean route risk spreads. Emerging market debt sells off modestly. Contained tension. But then comes Scenario 3. Escalation. Internal protests expand. Energy shortages trigger public unrest. External powers issue strong statements. Military assets reposition for precaution. This is where volatility accelerates. Energy traders price supply disruption. Defense stocks rally. Emerging market currencies weaken. Safe haven assets rise. Even without direct conflict, perception of instability near U.S. borders creates psychological shock. Capital moves towards safety. When capital moves quickly, liquidity evaporates elsewhere. Fragile banking systems feel pressure. High debt sovereigns face refinancing stress. Corporate spreads widen. The domino is no longer Cuba. The domino becomes confidence. And confidence is the foundation of the modern financial system. When confidence erodes, markets overshoot. The irony is that Cuba itself may not collapse, but its instability could catalyze broader repricing in a system already stretched thin. This is how modern crises form. Not through isolated failure, but through interconnected vulnerability. The global system today is more leveraged than it was 15 years ago. Debt levels are higher. Political polarization is sharper. Policy flexibility is narrower. That is why even peripheral flashpoints matter more. Is Cuba guaranteed to trigger such a shift? No. But is it positioned at a geographic and symbolic crossroads during a period of global fragility? Yes. And that combination deserves attention. As we move deeper into this decade, watch carefully. Watch energy shipments. Watch diplomatic visits. Watch telecom infrastructure agreements. Watch regional military exercises. Watch shipping insurance rates. Because crises rarely announce themselves. They assemble quietly, piece by piece, until the picture becomes undeniable. If you want to stay ahead of the shifts shaping the global financial system, not the headlines after they explode, but the pressure before they move, subscribe. Because the next domino will not fall where most people are looking. And when it does, understanding the context may be the difference between reacting and anticipating.
When discussing Cuba in a geopolitical context, it is important to separate drama from structure. The focus is not war. The focus is positioning. Because in modern geopolitics, positioning often matters more than confrontation. In previous sections, we explored economic fragility, capital flow dynamics, and regional risk exposure. Now let's examine another layer, strategic influence. Not escalation, not conflict, but influence. Every major power today operates within zones of strategic sensitivity. For the United States, the Caribbean has historically been one of those zones. For emerging global powers, Latin America represents long-term opportunity, trade routes, commodities, infrastructure, connectivity. Cuba sits at the intersection of these interests, and when multiple powers show interest in the same region, financial markets begin to pay attention. Not because tanks move, but because expectations shift. One of the first areas where this becomes visible is defense spending. When geopolitical uncertainty increases, even slightly, Governments reassess readiness budgets. This does not imply imminent conflict. It reflects precaution. Defense allocations adjust gradually. Procurement cycles expand. Technology investments accelerate. Markets respond accordingly. Defense sector equities often move on perception, not action. Bond markets factor in future fiscal commitments. Currency markets respond to shifting geopolitical tone. These reactions are subtle, but they are measurable. Now consider maritime strategy. The Caribbean is a corridor. Commercial shipping, energy transport, agricultural exports. When strategic conversations begin around port access, infrastructure upgrades, or communications networks, investors analyze long-term control. Control influences security. Security influences insurance pricing. Insurance influences trade costs. Even minor shifts in risk perception can change pricing models. Again, not because of conflict, but because of optionality. Financial markets constantly price optionality. If there is even a small probability that strategic access patterns may shift over time, that probability enters valuation models. Cuba's role here is symbolic as much as practical. Symbolism matters in geopolitics. A symbolic foothold can alter negotiation leverage far beyond its economic size. That is why diplomatic visits matter. That is why infrastructure contracts matter. That is why telecommunications agreements matter. These are long-term signals, and long-term signals are often more important than short-term headlines. Another dimension worth examining is the defense industrial ecosystem. In periods of rising geopolitical complexity, investment flows toward resilience, cybersecurity, satellite monitoring, naval logistics, surveillance technologies. Not because war is imminent, but because preparedness becomes prioritized. Preparedness spending creates ripple effects across capital markets. Institutional investors track procurement cycles years in advance. Supply chains reorient gradually. Capital expenditures adjust. This is how geopolitical awareness integrates into economic forecasting. Now layer in fiscal dynamics. Higher defense and strategic infrastructure spending requires budget allocation. If governments expand precautionary budgets while already operating under elevated debt levels, bond markets monitor sustainability. Interest rates become sensitive to fiscal signaling, and fiscal signaling influences currency valuation. These are second-order effects. Cuba does not need to become unstable for these shifts to begin. It only needs to remain strategically relevant during a period of global tension. This distinction matters. Markets react to relevance. If Cuba becomes a recurring topic in strategic briefings, policy discussions, or regional planning documents, investors incorporate it into risk models. That incorporation may be gradual, but gradual shifts compound. Over time, even modest increases in regional risk premiums can alter capital allocation patterns. Funds rebalance, insurers adjust, sovereign spreads widen slightly. No dramatic event, just incremental repricing. Now consider technology. Modern geopolitics is not limited to physical presence. Digital infrastructure, fiber optic networks, satellite connectivity, data routing agreements. These form part of strategic positioning. If telecommunications infrastructure in Cuba evolves through partnerships with external powers, questions about data flows, signal access, and regional security emerge. Financial markets track these developments because digital control increasingly intersects with economic power. Again, not confrontation, alignment. Alignment influences trust. Trust influences capital. Capital follows stability. If alignment patterns become uncertain, capital becomes cautious. Caution slows investment. Slower investment reduces growth expectations, and reduced growth expectations influence equity pricing. This is the chain. Notice that none of these steps require military escalation. They require only strategic recalibration. In many ways, modern geopolitical competition is quieter than previous eras. It is expressed through contracts, technology agreements, port expansions, logistics hubs, and financing packages. Cuba's relevance lies in geography and symbolism. Its economic scale is limited. Its positioning is not. As the decade progresses, the question will not be, is there conflict? The more relevant question may be, is the strategic balance shifting? If the answer becomes yes, even gradually, markets will adjust. They always do. And adjustments rarely reverse quickly. Because once capital flows reposition, repositioning costs are high. The broader lesson here is about systemic fragility. When the global system carries high debt, high political polarization, and high strategic competition simultaneously, it becomes sensitive to nodes of influence. Cuba is one such node. Not explosive, not dominant, but influential. In previous decades, small regional developments might have remained contained. In today's interconnected system, containment is less certain. Information moves instantly, capital moves instantly, sentiment moves instantly, which means that even a measured, carefully managed strategic shift can echo faster than expected. That does not imply crisis, it implies awareness, and awareness is what sophisticated markets rely on. If you're watching global capital flows, if you're watching emerging geopolitical alignments, if you're watching defense and infrastructure budgets, Cuba becomes a variable worth monitoring, not for headlines, but for signals. Signals appear quietly, in procurement data, in maritime insurance spreads, in satellite contract announcements, in diplomatic scheduling patterns. And by the time those signals reach mainstream headlines, they are no longer early. As we move deeper into this decade, the financial system will likely remain sensitive to strategic realignments near critical trade corridors. Cuba represents proximity. Proximity to the United States, proximity to shipping lanes, proximity to energy logistics. Proximity amplifies relevance, and relevance attracts capital attention. If this series has shown anything, it is that dominoes in the modern world rarely fall because of size. They fall because of connection, and connection is what defines today's geopolitical economy. If you want to continue understanding how seemingly small strategic developments intersect with global capital flows, stay with this channel. Because the most important shifts in this decade will not always be loud. They will be structural, and structural changes shape markets long before headlines do.